I've been looking forward to this, to the evening and having Lisa here. Lisa was read here early on in the poetry series in the second season. She has her 9th book of poetry out, Absence and Presence, which was published last year. Her poems have appeared widely in Notre Dame Review, Prairie Schooner, Chicago Review, Epic, Michigan Quarterly, and so forth. She's a recipient of numerous awards, including one from the National Endowment of the Arts, the Oregon Arts Commission, the Literary Arts, the Rockefeller Foundation. She and her husband, Jim Grew, co-edited the poetry magazine Hubbub, and she teaches at Reed College. She also told me just before the reading that, if I can say this, she's had a paper accepted at the Sorbonne. Lisa. So can we give Lisa a hand? So she and Jim are going to go to the Paris in, I think, fairly soon. 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Would you join me in welcoming our poet tonight, Lisa Stienman? Lisa. Yay. Oh gosh. Somebody's going to move that down.
Yes, I think it.
You're a little shorter than he is.
I am a little short. Before I even start thanking all the people who made this possible, I should say I think going to Paris sounds more impressive than it's going to be. In any case, I do want to thank Tom and the Poetry Committee and the Leading Library and the town of Milwaukie. I think it's amazing the number of cultural events that Milwaukie manages to host, and I know how much time and energy and commitment it takes to make things like that happen. And I've been the grateful recipient of this wonderful burst of energy, mostly by being in the audience here, but I'm honored tonight to be able to also read here again. So I'm mostly going to read, well, the first half anyway, a little over half of the reading I want to do from my most recent book. As many of you may know, it's a book that has images and questions and maybe obsessions that keep coming back over and over throughout the book, but it's also primarily organized by seasons. So it's spring, summer, and so on. So at least the obsessions are looked at in different weather. And there's a little section in the middle where I sort of try to be unseasonal. I'm not quite sure I managed that. It's also, there's been a couple reviews I'm grateful for. And I noticed when I was thinking about putting the reading together that people have sort of followed different threads that are either woven together or maybe tangled throughout the book, and chosen different threads, and I think that's appropriate. But as I was looking over what I might read, I started chasing one thread and realizing I shouldn't be surprised by this, but I guess poetry is sort of a way where you keep encountering yourself. But all my life I've been, I suppose, puzzled by the way, even when you're dealing with very domestic and local settings, which most of my poetry does start there, it always seems like we're bombarded with, or we encounter so many different things, televisions and reading and friends and noisy neighbors, whatever, encounters in the grocery store, but world news. It's difficult to put everything together, and that sort of sense of how things do, how you connect the dots, or how things do or don't go together, is always something that's, I suppose, interested me. And gosh, it showed up again. I think it's not surprising that my favorite punctuation mark is the ... the ellipsis. In any case, to be a little unseasonal tonight because I've done a number of readings from the book, and I have some sweet and loyal friends who have heard those earlier readings. I'm not going to start as I usually do, and as the book does, with spring. I'm going to start with summer. And with a poem that, indeed, I guess it had its first seeds as Jim and I, my husband and I, were getting ready to leave on a reasonably long trip. It's called Dwelling. From a distance, all islands look the same, mere interruptions of water. Up close, the local chaos is not what you had in mind, battling for order as you do. You'd give your kingdom for a pen, but you have no kingdom and no geographical turn. At home, you look at the spaces you cultivate the way others landscape yards or grow squash. In your bath, baskets on the steel towel rack shelves. In the living room, blue slats of light, a leather couch tossed into place, a rug missing. Suitcases wait in a line by the door like aging bodies in front of a theater that features musicians come down in the world. Although the world is round and mostly water and space. You sit at an oak table near 6 stems, leaves with disturbingly fleshy red berries, arranged and slightly deranged on a blue-green tile. Outside, the foliage is so thick, it looks like an emergency vehicle arriving each time the neighbor backs her car out, red flashing through interstices of leaf, branch, frond. Summer keeps starting and stalling and starting over, though when you return, the leaves will have released the light, or vice versa. Your eyes will be full of the unfamiliar, the home, the house like that mat of leaves, a squirrel's nest at the top of the sycamore, yesterday's news, abandoned, but not without marking a spot where the eye could dwell. So this one is almost more literally about connecting dots, but also testifies to the truth, which is I can't tell constellations apart, which may have something to do with my having very bad eyesight, but probably is more related to the fact that I've never spent any time trying to learn how to tell the constellations apart. It's called puzzling. My father expressed himself with talismans, a can opener, a ruler, uncostly but material things. Thinking this as I brush the crumbs of light off the counter or water the garden. There are spaces between words here, sites of possibility, states of mind for which we have no words. The cosmos is in full flower, the birch full of early birds, all branches a-twitter. Each night, looking at the night sky, it's all dipper, dipper, dipper. Not only dippers, but all, everything in the great soupy universe dipped or dipping. Soft ice cream cones in hard hats, ballroom dancers out for ratings, not melting hearts. Bodies fretted by heat next to bodies of water. Sign-waved charts on office walls, all singing a cappella. Dip, 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 dip. It's as difficult when dots connect in just one way as when they do not. And this one is, I suppose, about family connections, although the family in the poem is a little different than the reference to family in the last poem. It's called Filial Piety. For 6 months, he had been taking care of the old woman, driving her to doctors with her smell of pee and her querulous voice. The only nice thing she ever said to him was about the trees they passed being tall, as if he had set the world stage for her. Yet with a mother's unerring instinct for harm, the bad weather also was his fault. A saint, too, he was when she died, handling bureaucrats, cards from insurance companies, refusing to pay, but for all that, sorry for his loss. And what was lost? It's difficult to see, but now as he drives to work or out to buy milk or sips tea on the back porch, the trees cannot straighten their trunks. The rain is coming. His voice, peevish as a crow's, picks at the flaws, the wrongs done, how nothing works. Even the phone line one calls to check the time refuses to work. I think it's appropriate for the poem, but I'm not at all sure there still is a phone line that you could call to get the phone, to get the time. In any case, with that forecast of rain, I'm actually going to move to a few fall poems. And this one I have read a number of times before, but I like it, and I was very pleased when the New York-based Poetry Society of America picked it up out of the book and posted it on their website. And in fact, with a bit of a little interview in which I explained, because they asked, that I had been trying to write short, condensed poems. I was thinking of them as poems that should be single-gestured and not have everything but the kitchen sink in them, which most of my poems do. So I'd been reading people, poets and prose writers, who seemed to me to have that gift of pithy and condensed short statements, including Pascal, whose one-liners in the Pensée are often very weird, but indeed suggestive. And he shows up. He has a walkthrough, a cameo appearance in the poem. In any case, as I was writing the poem, as I was reading all those people, I did start writing short poems, but I didn't like them. They seemed way too sort of pat, as if they were inadequate to the untidiness of the world. So a poem that started out as trying to be just about looking at a bird feeder turned into the following poem, which is, I'm afraid, not short. Don't worry, it's not an epic. It's called Rainy Afternoons of the Soul. No dark nights, the only sign that there are no signs at all. Oh, Earth, this could be a deal breaker. Desire stitches night to day. I ask my pencil to make an apple, brown leaf, ridged folds of rust and yellow. The pencil declines. The unsketched apples, perishable, reticent, objectively there, though a pen, an umbrella, and a key have gone missing. Do lost opportunities count? In the bird feeder, a song and dance sparrow pecks away. In our house, weekly, you feed the birds while I marry the socks into matching pairs. I speak in indexicals, no nominalist I, so everything's pared down. In the shower, the cuddle bone-like core of a bar of soap, just for example. Although I consider how Montaigne says it is pitiful to be languid and feeble even in one's desires. And we don't want pity, but birds, taking flight presumably. Like the old man on the bus whose finger traces signs on his jeans, no ink, writing lists of items he can't forget. Or maybe the letters of a new alphabet with which he could break into another world. Not the one where the birds at the feeder are food for thought. domestic hieroglyphs, or where light glints on the red pickup truck across the street and almost makes up for all this emptiness. For the loneliness, I'd say, but that requires desire. Like Pascal's, he carried near his heart a scrap of parchment that said, joy. I don't know why I'm haunted by 17th century Frenchmen when outside my study a hummingbird tries to drink from a red plastic mesh bag, the kind that holds or used to hold fruit, the bird's small beak thrusting into what contains only air and is itself more emptiness than weave, like a series of commas trying to splice fragments of thought together. Go figure. Today, being Sunday and a holiday, you note that we will not get mail twice. I can see some turning point arriving from quite far away. God save us, I'd say, were I inclined to invoke higher powers, not this trying, nothing, doing. So the rest of the poems I'm going to read from the book are shorter, but I'm not going to promise they're tidy. This is shiftlessness. Interstices speak more loudly than things. You have no fear of falling. Your window frames a body, a mass of leaves. Wind makes them shiver. You could have written breeze, but the weather is neither promising nor ominous. You're becalmed. Then again, there are crumbs of light on the wall, chiaroscuro and untidiness in league. Can you write your way out of this impasse or into it? And okay, this is a poem. I think it maybe turned out a little more somber than I meant it to be. It actually started rather playfully. A little over a year ago, I think maybe it was about a year ago, I got an email, a rather stern email from someone new in the Human Resources Department where I work, who told me that they could not continue to hire me by law unless they looked at my birth certificate. And I thought, well, that's fair enough, law's law, if you have to do that. But they looked at my birth certificate the year before. And I thought, did they think it was going to change? So I sort of started thinking about occasions like that probably don't change, and ended up with a sort of thinking about sending postcards back to the earth after you've died. And I have a few sort of one-liners that I thought of putting on such postcards. I'll do air quotes to mark them. And the poem is called Grave Postcard. It's the death thing that's bothering me, that end, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, like birth, but with no safe harbor and unthinkable in retrospect. No local color. You should have seen the asphodel. The worms were glorious this year. It's all a bit foggy, no details to write home about, and all your friends waving goodbye before they move on. It's not that somber, right? And this one is called Dreaming Ferociously. So ferociously that when you wake, the world is dilapidated. At what have you been working so much effort while asleep? Rising, what you can see has curiously little substance, though the green of leaf stacked on leaf outside is solid enough. Just not the stone-like stuff of dreams. Nights left you so weary, you now need whatever it is we call the opposite of sleep. And the last of the poems I want to read, 4 more poems from the book, and they're from that middle, out of season section. They partly came because I was teaching. What you're reading and talking about with students sort of becomes part of your life. And I was teaching a unit on pastorals, literary pastorals. And I'm sure most of you know, I mean, they're related to, but not quite the same as what we mean when we talk about pastoral, meaning just countryside or rural. And in fact, they're an urban form. Going back to the classics, they're typically written by people who are trying to think of a place that's not as chaotic and complicated as the urban centers from which they get written. So as I was reading, I discovered there's sort of two camps of people that talk about pastorals. One camp who really don't like them, feeling that they are a kind of escapist fantasy, denying the real world, which we really should be paying attention to. And another posse, I suppose, of critics who note that a lot of the traditional pastorals are one way or another very conscious of the fact they're being written by someone who has their feet very much on real ground in a real, at the time, modern world, and that they are imagining another place, thus making the poems a kind of testimony to the power of the human imagination to think of the world not having to be the way it is. And I guess those ideas were sort of bouncing around in my head as I was writing this section. And the first poem is called Pastoral Constructions. The full moon glows behind the cedar. Then the sun rises, orange and yellow. Birds make the only sounds, though 7 goats stand near a field of vines. Yes, there's a satellite dish, and next door, a pool. Eventually, a car, from the sound of it, takes to the road. Yet birds ghost through the pine tree. Someone is sweeping their steps. Bunches of grapes, missed at harvest, dry in the sun. The number of things a person can think at once are limited here. So much for the theory that the world might be reimagined. All doves, no crows. One owl complaining about the light, which surely does not have to be the same light that falls on cities. Here, there's heat and dust, and yes, there's hunger too, always. Of course, you were told the country might be boring. And interestingly, it is, what with the dying light renewed daily. Dying is a little boring. It seems the blankness of the field cuts 2 ways. And this one is called Cosmopolitan Vacation. The guidebook says it's almost Africa. No wheat planted for centuries now, but the wine, they say, is better, even if the mills, fat still presences on the flat land, pine for grist. You gather the feral cats, the goats, and the endless dogs all into one field, while the birds go hither and yon as birds will. The pine cones brood in the trees. You practice the stations of the walk home from the bar, a blue tower, a green traffic cone, a suburban house, a farm on a curve in the road, an empty shrine, because nothing is sacred. 2 signs featuring cows, one saying it died for your sins. Litter by the side of the road. Even the dogs speak Latin and Greek. And this is growing old in place. Each wave leaves a mark, remarks, changing where water and land meet in this prosaic, flat place. Inland, an old man kicks the dry soil into rows. The poetry of flatness pulses like an alarm clock that sounds every 20 minutes all night, as if there were a small, tinny emergency just out of sight. You had to have been there. No, you have to be here. And it's not the last poem in the book, but the last poem from this section and from the book that I will read. This is called Island Solitude Simile. Winds howl. The trees don't care, although the laundry is quite excited, sleeves waving from each porch. Where are the philosophers when we need them to explain storm on ocean, the expectancy of islands? Like a cat who goes from the front door to the side to the back, looking for better weather, spots of blue lollop across the sky. I would like to finish off the reading 6 poems written since the book was completed. I was thinking I wanted to at least have new images. I can't seem to get rid of my obsessions, but maybe I could have new images. And I thought maybe a few more people might show up in my poems. So this poem was inspired, in fact, by a poem by my husband, Jim Chagru, that's called There Are Those Words, which sort of took on all the words that people had been telling and been using too many times in poems. And, of course, in the process of naming all the words he used too many times, he sort of reclaimed them. It's a much better poem than the one I've written, I might add to it. His words were silence, rain, and dark. Mine seem more to involve flora and fauna, and in particular, cats and birds. So the poem is called Starting Over. As if for Lent, relinquish the slow return of daylight, the sense that some good will turn up, like the soil from the gardens, turn row, turn row, turn row. Or take vegetables not often praised, Brussels sprouts, those cruciferous brassica, kohlrabi, Jerusalem artichoke, the green snouts of corn and bulb. Give them up. Then banish birds, the Townsend's warbler, yellow glinting in patchy light, the mob of bush tits, all bustle and fuss, the swallow that chases them away. Banish the berry-colored lanky branches of wild currant, the streaks of rose-inflected light in the sky at evening, taboo. Finally, all this thinking, rising light, the ebb and flow of them, done. The neighbor in her yard humming loudly and off key can stay. Actually, I didn't want her to, but there you go. And a related poem, you'll notice the return of the obviously not at all repressed cats and birds. The poem is called Ghost Cats and Birds. I woke for once, with all my dreaming done, to find you busy feeding ghost cats, keeping them full of kibble so good any cat would come back for it from the other side. The porousness of boundaries between what makes sense and what does not helps us talk to ourselves. Cats disagree, being all hope and fleas, all personality and ferocity. Still, they remain our cats. The birds stand for the world's quirks, fleeting, physical, incalculable. Of course, not all cats are domestic. The one rarely mentions feral birds, and the ghost cats are not literally dead, just set in their ways, hunting, keening, imagining other ways. And suddenly there are ghost birds here in early morning light, birds where you'd least expect them. Outside my window, a black, bird-like shape shifts the slats of light through the blinds. Not a bird in the bush, I think, cleaning my glasses. More a bird in the corner of the eye, I hazard, chin in hand. Or maybe it's the blinds misleading the blind. The cats fed streak away. They are their own creatures, though not in the same way the birds are as they wing away, lost in transit. And this next poem is, in fact, called Being in Transit. I originally tried to, it's about the third poem I've tried to give the following title to, Sic Transit Gloria Mundi, which is thus passes the glory of the world. It's a very traditional accompaniment to Memento Mori, reminders of mortality. But nobody liked the title, including the editor who published the poem under the title Being in Transit, though it does sneak in a few other traditional reminders of Memento Mori, including one that's always interested me. It's a early 15th century fresco by Masaccio that's called The Holy Trinity, and it's actually a trick of perspective. It looks like it's got three different areas in it, but it's just a flat fresco, and it does have the Holy Trinity and the people who probably funded the painting, and then below, looking as if it's jutting out, a tomb with a skeleton on it, next to whom are written in Latin, I once was what you are, and what I am, you also will be. The poem isn't all set in early modern Europe or the Middle Ages. It's also originally, in fact, inspired by a sort of dismaying news article I read years ago about a murder in White Plains, New York. And I tried to write about it because it kind of haunted me and couldn't find a way to make it work in a poem. And then, alas, recent newspaper articles have brought back similar issues, and so this is, I guess, my other attempt. So, being in transit. The recurring nightmares all involve being lost in transit. Subways, trains, airports, every once in a while, a back alley in a strange city, or a library. You have to be somewhere, and the information counters won't tell you the point of departure. You do know they are shooting old men in White Plains, where your mother dozed and you and your sister tried on discount clothing once. His medical alert went off while he slept. It called those paid to serve, but they forgot. They arrived sans stretchers with guns. They saw black and a man. They did not see old or ill. They killed an old man, the one with a bad heart, an epidemic of bad hearts. Let those who have ears hear. Let the eyes have it. What occurs need not have happened. You used to think running those corridors from gate to platform to gate meant you wanted to start over or arrive, to get somewhere. You had time only to skim the news. Last night, waiting for the subway, going the wrong way, anxious as ever, you suddenly saw you had to catch a train going the other way one stop, to get off at Wall Street, where you could look at your grave. Just the lower panel, under which was written, "What you are, I once was." Dance macabre playing in the background. Danza macabra, danza de la muerte. So you return one stop to resume being where you now see you should be, where the wall is just an impediment, is not your proper station. Lost in transit is. You look up from reading to see the viburnum, arrowwood, wayfaring tree has formed globes of off-white, graying in gray weather, one globe heart-shaped, another like a shell, a confection in the shape of a shell. It occurs to you, if you held it to your ear, you might hear what it has to say. So, I'm so glad I brought a little thermos that fits exactly in the little cubby hole here, because there's a big sign that says you're not supposed to put water up here. That last poem, I suppose, was an argument with the world, maybe a bit with myself. This poem is not an argument, more of a conversation, written for a friend of mine, someone that used to live in Portland, also a poet whom I much admire still, but with whom I used to be able to go out and talk poetry with, at going out for drinks or for dinner. She was someone who very much insisted that poems be plain spoken and clear. You may have noticed I sometimes have a little trouble with that, temperamentally, perhaps incapable of it. One of her favorite phrases was, "No ifs, ands, or buts." So that's the title of this poem. No plates shifting underground. No clever games, you say. Sturdy as an old Ford, you say. Terra firma, you insist. Have you solved all the world's problems? The barmaid asks the men rowdy in the next Naugahyde booth, who have not only done so, but created whole new ones. In my yard, the currant bush's lanky branches bud. The viburnums tossed caution to the wind. It's weather that's all the news. Floods, tornadoes, in the face of which gardening appears pure indulgence. The sun itself has been acting up again. Would that the world could just settle down. Then again, what should one do if not consider what might count as a good life? Ifs, ands, and buts abound. You tell the barmaid you want something that's strong and clear. I think, but not still, in motion to the end. What I say is, but not sweet, never, we agree, sweet. So I have two more poems. This one, all right. I obviously went through a phase where I was looking at a lot of medieval and early modern art. So, rows of saints in Gothic cathedrals and funeral statuary, and they do make a slight appearance here. But this is more about very contemporary ad language, televisions, and indeed public signage. And the two signs that appear at the end of the poem until very recently really did exist on Northeast Broadway in Portland and outside a place where I often go to eat. Alas, one of them has disappeared, so I guess the poem is partly a graveyard for public signs. It also has an epigraph or head note. I always look in dictionaries, not just because I'm a bad speller, but I like to know where words come from, what their origins are, and how they've changed and how we use them over time and what languages they come from. Because I kind of think they drag that baggage with them, at least we hear the tones, even if we're not fixed on dictionaries. In this case, however, I just loved the turn of phrase in my Merriam-Webster dictionary giving definitions for the word affection, which it counts as a tender attachment or the feeling aspect of consciousness. Isn't that nice? So that's heads the poem, which is called Saints and Psychics. All the ads hawk funerals and hearing aids. You'd think they'd assume I can't hear them, though in ways I can. Over dinner, I confess that I too fold each night my hands over my heart, ready for whatever might come, if only heartburn. I lie like a statue, but not marble, but thinking of not thinking. I may overvalue intelligence, as my father used to say. Still, I'm thinking about whole rows of saints, hands clasped or crossed, but not marble. Stone, clad or skeletal, they knew or thought they knew their relationship to earth. Some are in, as it said, living color. Some, exposed to the elements, are chipped, gray, pockmarked by the graffiti of water and air on stone. On their names, verdigris, the green of Greece, visible. Sometimes the he or she of their bodies, not clear. Back out on the street after dinner, I misread the signs. Psychotic reader. No, psychic reader. Palms read here. The sign's old, the psychic out of business. She or he should have known better. I add the reader to my community of saints who seem to have a better hold on the future. Next door, another shop sign says, kites, too. If only one could soar and stay tethered to the ground. Reading the signs so, I feel a tender attachment, akin to affection, if not quite as intimate a feeling as that. And the poem I'd like to end with is also, I sometimes feel I get a little mean about public language, maybe it's age, but I'm not, I thought I might try to be nicer to it, but I'm not sure I managed to. There are indeed television newscasters in this poem, and you know those customer satisfaction surveys that crop up with recorded voices on your phone sometimes? They show up. And this poem also has a head note. This time it does have to do with the origin of our word sad, which comes originally from an Old English word that means sated. But as it progressed into modern English, it got mixed in with the Latin word satis, meaning enough. And it interested me that the word from which we get satisfaction and sad are, well, they're at least cousins. My dictionary says akin to the Latin. I'm really not at all sure what akin to means, but I'm guessing there's a kind of convergence that happens. The poem is called Purifying the Language. Last night, locally, there was breaking news. So the anchor woman said. A car ran into a fence near a house. No one was hurt. It must have been the fence that was broken. And it's sad. Sad, I read, meaning heavy-hearted, meaning sated, meaning fed up, which I am sorry to say I am. Meanwhile, this morning, the world's abloom with noise. The telephone rings, but no one is there. Then there is no one banging on the front door. It could have been a dream, or the world was trying to break in, making its someone is calling noise. It's someone is at the door noise. And now someone is calling again. This time it's a recording, a disembodied voice asking, did your health provider use words you could understand? I'm okay, I say, but if things had been different, I doubt I would have understood words like death or pain. Not really. The voice does not understand me, though it apologizes and asks whether I said yes or no. But now I'm all ambivalence, on the fence between fed up and replete, which is to say, sad. I used to like happy endings, which now sounds like a contradiction in terms. Happy endings fall in medias res. Why did it take so long for me to see this? The thief is caught, the heroine survives, avec hero, sans hero, happiness always an ellipsis, a space between. So, thank you. So I have been here often enough to know I will continue to stand here. I'd be more than happy, either collectively or individually, if you don't want to talk collectively, to answer questions or chat.
Well, you were talking, Lisa, about pastorals, and do you have a favorite class that you like to teach?
Oh, it's usually the one I'm teaching at the moment. But I do like, I like that. That's in a class that's a kind of introduction to poetry class. And I put different, it usually has the same structure, but I put different poems in every year. And I love it, and I partly love it because it's usually people who haven't read a lot of poetry or who've read it but not thought a lot about it. And you get to see light bulbs go on as people suddenly think, oh, poems can do this. And I really love doing that. So that's probably my favorite recurring class. I mean, I teach older students early 20th century American poets, and I love those poets. They're important to me. But I sort of learned from my students in those classes. They already have, their light bulbs are on.
Yeah.
Dan.
Keying off of what he asked, is there any class you'd like to teach but haven't been able to?
Oh, I have a fair amount of leeway in what I teach, but I'm relegated to one semester. So I think what I'd really like to teach is a class that sort of, I don't know, starts somewhere in the late 18th century, probably with Wordsworth and on into Shelley, and then comes forward to Wallace Stevens or Marianne Moore, and then on even more to more contemporary work. But I couldn't do that in a semester without it being a kind of survey, and that surveys don't interest me because you just, oh, it's Monday, it must be the Romantics. You don't really get to dwell with the language and the poets and what they're, what they're saying. So.
Could you tell us about your invitation in France?
Well, I write a lot about poets like Wallace Stevens or Marianne Moore. I don't write the way they write, but they're not only influences. I'm constantly trying to figure out new ideas come to me, and then the poems look different when I ask different questions, even if I read them over and over. So usually when you work as a critic, scholar, whatever, on what's modern American poetry, you get invited to Buffalo, New York, or Pittsburgh, they're perfectly good cities, but they're not exotic, if you will, or they don't, I grew up on the East Coast of the US, they're cities I have been to before. Suddenly there's this burst of interest, it seems, abroad, especially in Wallace Stevens. So I got invited, actually last year, I got to go to Belgium to talk about Wallace Stevens and very contemporary African-American poetry. That was a lot of fun. And this year I got another invitation to go and talk about Wallace Stevens and the French language. I first refused. My French is not all that hot. but neither was Stevens. So, the person who invited me assured me that French was not required. I'm pretty sure it's going to be required for things like, I don't know, buying toothpaste or whatever, might come up in the course of the day, but for giving the paper. So I'm talking about sort of Stevens' imagination of the French language in the very early part of the 20th century. I'm smiling at Annie because her husband actually gave me the idea of what I could say. Someone I teach with. I'm going to have to pronounce a few French words. I've been listening to YouTube sort of nonstop with a little bit of trepidation. So, how do you say médaille?
Well, if there aren't any more questions, speaking of Annie, Annie is going to be here. She will be here in June as our reader, the last reader of the season. Thank you very much, Lisa. This was absolutely fabulous.
Thank you.